This conference will now be recorded.
All right, I will call this meeting to order. I think we all know each other. Does anybody want to do introductions? We've had Jed at a lot of meetings, and Chris Farrar, I think everybody's familiar with too. Welcome, both of you guys. If you don't know us, the rest of us are either the advisory committee members, or there's two, Gail and Ian are the county staff members who are here. So, okay, review of the meeting summary. I did read the, I wasn't at the last meeting, but I read through it and it sounded like an interesting one. I want to hear more about the gorge and like how to get there and go hiking if that's a thing. That doesn't have to happen at this meeting, I don't think, but is there anything you guys want to say about the last meeting or any changes to the minutes?
I have a correction. It shows me as both being excused absent and in attendance, but I was not in attendance. And Dirk was, and his name is not on the present list. That my understanding is that he was. I obviously wasn't, but.
Okay, got that. Thanks, Cheryl.
Okay, so if there's no other comments on that, is there any public comment or input? We have a few minutes for that at the beginning of the meeting here. If Jed or Chris wants to say anything.
Jen, I would at some point be willing to give you sort of a summary of the last countywide CAC meeting. We used to do that. They used to be in the agenda, but then it sort of fell out. But I would be glad to just very briefly hit the highlights whenever you want that.
You guys are working on goal 5 still in the countywide?
Yeah, so our last meeting was December 17th. It was an interesting one. We started at 10 a.m. and we finished at 5 p.m. We did have a little 30 minutes for lunch. We did 3 different topics. We went back to and picked up the end of cultural resources, which had been our October meeting. And what we were talking about is 2 specific policies that referred to Native Americans. So there was great discussion on what kind of vocabulary is appropriate. There was intense discussion about whether or not specific tribes should be listed. Good discussion, long discussion, and the short answer is in the end, we decided on the wording Native Americans and no specific tribes were listed. We also worked on groundwater resources. That one we had started in November, so we finished up groundwater resources, and then we started on wildlife habitat resources. And the only one I wanted to share out of that was that we as Northeast CAC, when we were doing the wildlife habitat resources, and we talked a lot about riparian vegetation and its purposes and its function, and we ended up listing all of the good things that it does. And then as you recall, we ended up actually writing it into a goal. So it was our aspirational language. And I just wanted to say to you that the work that we did went to the countywide group. It was discussed, it was supported, and it was accepted to be part of that language. So I just wanted to report back to you all that the work that we do every month does not just end up in a pile of papers, but it actually goes back to the county and it does get discussed, and the things that we're doing are getting included and at least being proposed into the county-wide one. And that's all from the county-wide one that was in December.
Great. Then I think we can move on to the meat of our meeting here, reviewing goal 5 topics: wilderness areas, natural areas, and open spaces. So Gail or Ian, do you guys want to do the overview?
Yep, I'll give an overview on this. So goal 5, as we've talked about, there are 12 resources that the county is required to inventory, and then there are 3 resources that we are encouraged but not required to inventory. So tonight we're going to be talking about 3 different resource groups. We're going to be talking about natural areas and wilderness areas, which are both required to be in the comprehensive plan. And we'll also be talking about open spaces, which is one of those optional categories. So as far as natural area goes, per the Oregon administrative rules, a natural area is defined as a place that is listed on the Oregon State Register of Natural Heritage Resources. And in Clatsop County, we have 3 of them. We have the Blind Slough Swamp Preserve, which is managed by the Nature Conservancy. We have the Napa Slough Island, which is managed by DSL, Department of State Lands. And then we have Saddle Mountain, which is managed by Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. If we were still in a place where the state was requiring us to conduct a periodic review of our comprehensive plan, we'd also have to be required to consider other natural areas that are not in the plan right now. But we are asking that the committee members do keep in mind that we have the option to identify additional areas, and then through that ESEE process, that environmental, social, economic, and energy review, to go ahead and identify conflicting resources with those areas that we want to add, and go through that process in order to include them in our inventory. And then I have a little speech read out, but I was trying not to read it. But anyway, as we're going through this, there are going to be areas where you may personally know some areas that you would like to include or think are worthy of inclusion. And we had also provided reference in our memo to the draft Oregon Natural Areas Plan of 2020, which talks about natural areas, how they're defined, and the different types of natural areas that there are throughout the state. And part of the reason that we want to protect natural areas is that we want to protect biodiversity and critical habitat. We want to continue to provide educational and research opportunities by protecting these lands that may have some unique flora on them, and also to protect ways of life and provide safety from natural hazards. And for example, we had the landslide in Astoria yesterday or the day before, and the house came down the hill. So those are all things that we want to keep in mind. So that's natural areas. And then wilderness areas, the other mandatory resource that we have to review, are those areas that have been designated by the federal government under the National Wilderness Preservation System. And that's a program that was created back in 1964 by President Johnson, and it's currently administered by the U.S. Forest Service. And here in Clatsop County, we have one wilderness area that's federally designated, and it's the Oregon Islands, which actually stretches the entire coastline of the state. And so here that would include the Tillamook Head rocks, Bird rocks, Sea Lion rocks, Haystack Rock, Castle Rock, Jockey Cap, Tim Rock, Gull Rock, and then there are some unnamed rocks that are down in the southern mid to southern part of the coast of the county. And then for open spaces, what we're looking at are things according to OIR, which include parks, forests, wildlife preserves, nature reservations or sanctuaries, and public or private golf courses, oddly enough. And when we did the comprehensive plan back in 1979, 1980, the county itself specified 3 types of open space. One is just general open space, which would include all farm and forest lands throughout the county, estuarine areas, the Pacific Ocean, and then the beaches along the ocean. The second area that we included were site-specific resources, which would be the things that I mentioned previously: the parks, the wildlife refuges, the natural areas, the scenic sites, and freshwater wetlands. And then the third type of open space that the county identified are just kind of these general open spaces that are site specific, driven by usually a specific type of residential development. And mainly that will apply primarily to properties in the Clatsop Plains where we've had subdivisions come in, and they are mandated to keep a minimum of 30% open space in their subdivisions. Yeah, I think that is it. So as we go through the policies in Goal 5 related to these resources, you'll see that in Table 1, the overall comprehensive plan, the one that covers all the county-wide area, only has 5 policies related to natural areas, wilderness areas, and open space. When we get to your community plan, there are significantly more than that, and they're more tailored to your Northeast planning area. And then Table 3, as we've been working, will be the new issues that we identify, the threats and the trends that we see coming over the next 20 years, and how those may impact these resources, and then trying to identify some basic draft language about policies that we can put in the plan to address those concerns. So that covers my introduction. Are there any questions?
Okay. So does anybody have any policies that they want to talk about right off the bat? Okay. So do we want to talk about any of the current policies, or just accept the staff notes and move on to the new issues and policies?
I think we can accept the staff notes. Anyone else have an opinion?
Yeah, so there are 4 policies under natural areas and then 1 under wilderness. And I was fine with the staff recommendations on all 5 of those.
Mm-hmm. Same here. Okay, so then on Table 2, in Policy 3, part of the staff recommendation was just clarifying what constitutes full protection. Is that something that the staff needs our input on?
Yes, if you have some thoughts about what you would think would constitute full protection, because it's not defined, and I know that's one thing that constantly people ask about, you know, what does significant mean? What does full protection mean? So if you have some thoughts.
I don't have thoughts on what that means, but I have a question maybe for Gail. What about Tenasselee Island out in the river? It's National Wildlife Preserve, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a national wildlife. I don't know if it's part of the refuge. I'd have to check, Cheryl. I don't know.
What is its designation? Does it not come in to one of these?
It is not in the Natural Heritage Program, and it's not part of a federally designated wilderness area. So the wildlife refuge may be different than a wilderness area. And I think we talked about that when we talked about wildlife habitat. A little bit. But I don't know if Tenasili, which I probably just said wrong, if that's actually in the refuge or not.
And can things be cross-listed? Like, are some spaces on more than one inventory list, or what? It seems a little overwhelming how many different inventories there are. Like, just ways of saying this is a nice space that we don't want people to build on.
Yeah, it is overwhelming. It's like goal 5 was the place they put everything they didn't know what else to do with, so they kind of lumped it all together. But yeah, there will be overlap in a lot of these places, and there's no reason why they can't be included on more than one inventory.
Okay.
And I would just add, all the islands in the Columbia River are mostly zoned aquatic natural, which means they have a comprehensive plan designation of natural. And then part of one of the islands, I don't know which one it is zoned conservation shorelands.
So Ian, where might that show up? So it is zoned natural, but it's aquatic natural.
So I was just looking on the Clatsop County web maps with the zoning layer turned on. And then in our zoning ordinance, you can see there's a table which has the comprehensive plan designations and then which zones fall under that comp plan designation.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to take us too far afield. Thank you.
I wonder if it's just expected that everybody realizes the estuary is referring only to the Columbia River estuary? And should it be specified as such, or is everybody okay with just in the estuary?
I think that's the only estuary in the Northeast, though, isn't it, Chris? Or is there another one that I'm not aware of?
I really don't know, but I would say really any of the rivers that the tributaries that get any tidal influence could possibly be considered an estuary. I don't know. It's a good point. I still think it should have a name on it because it's like saying the mountain. I mean, which mountain? Give it a name. It deserves a name.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I don't really have any other ideas about full protection or, like how to define that better. It seems pretty similar to me to other language that we've used around protecting areas. So
I don't know. I think that you really should try to make some statement about what that means. I mean, it could mean that you don't want it to change from the way it is now, or you pick some date that you don't want it to be altered from the condition it was in at some point in time. That would be some sort of full protection. Otherwise, it's true, you'd end up with a laundry list of of just a whole lot of things. Protect the soil, protect the water, protect the plants, protect, this, that, and the other thing. But if you said don't let it change intentionally from the way it is now by human caused actions, but let it change as it would naturally without human intervention, something to that effect. I don't know. It just seems pretty nebulous, leaving it
Mhm.
unexplained.
Gail, do you have any recommendations for us? I do think this is an important one, that the estuary is critical for a lot of things. And I was wondering why it ended up in the Northeast Community Plan, but possibly because things like Tenasselee Island are in the Northeast. So a lot of those islands out there that are in the estuary that are important are physically closest to the Northeast. So maybe that's why it ended up with us. I agree that full protection should be clarified. Unfortunately, I don't have any input on it. But I like this policy 3. I think we should try to hang on to it.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Cheryl, I don't have a specific definition or recommendation about how to really clarify what full protection means. So, it may be something that maybe we can work on and come back to you with something on that.
Look, question,
So-
Gail.
It says the natural areas there, is it just referring to the ones listed on this inventory of natural areas? Like we've got Redwood Cliffs and Bradley State Park as our Northeast natural areas. So is it just talking about those 2 spots, or is it talking about anything in the estuary?
So I'm sorry, Jennifer, I didn't quite hear and understand your question.
I'm just wondering if it's just referring to our 2 designated natural areas, the Redwood Cliffs and Bradley State Park, or if it's talking about a larger area of estuary.
Okay, so that's a good question. I would take it to mean that it refers to the inventoried areas.
Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder too if was this policy written before the zoning was applied? Is this a kind of does this policy predate the zoning ordinance?
they're probably pretty close, but this would have been adopted first, and then the zoning ordinance would have been adopted after it. But they were both adopted on September 30th.
I'm just wondering if this policy was already implemented by designating natural areas in the estuary that are necessary to maintain a healthy balance, blah, 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 by applying the aquatic natural or conservation zoning to those lands. And that's how they were protected.
It could be. So if we were to work on that assumption, we could add language that perhaps says like full protection shall include maintaining, what is it, aquatic natural zoning?
Yeah, the 2 I saw were aquatic natural and conservation shorelands.
I need to go grab my power cord. I'll be right back.
Okay, all right. And then conservation shorelands, is that a natural or is that a conservation other resources?
I will need to check on that one
Okay.
moment. That is conservation other resources.
Okay. All right, how would something like that work? Would that help add a little bit of clarification to the full protection? And would we want to add anything else to that? So in case everybody can't read it, it says full protection shall include maintaining the aquatic, natural, and conservation shoreland zoning and natural and conservation other resources land use designations, which is what's, as Ian pointed out, what's in place protecting them right now.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems nicely specific.
I think this is getting them there, and it expands beyond those two listed ones, you know, that Jennifer pointed out to us, and instead it talks about maintaining that zoning that was applied. The aquatic natural is really important for protecting the estuary. For instance, for development in the estuary, a lot of times there it needs to be dredging, and so if it's natural and there's excessive dredging in the river, then that natural protection is real important.
Mhm.
I don't think we want to just assume that because something got zoned that it's covered and, you know, protected forever. So for us to say this shall include maintaining the aquatic natural, I think we're getting there. I'm liking this.
Great. Any other comments on this policy? Okay, so now we've got scenic and natural areas policies, policy 2. Staff note mentions that we don't have all of the spots included in the inventory. So you just want, the staff is recommending we just add a couple of locations to this inventory. Is that what that note means?
Yeah. So if there are any additional sites that you believe should be included in the inventory, that's fine. If you're happy with the inventory the way it is, that would be fine as well. And then we would actually need to, if we identify sites, work on getting those listed in the Natural Heritage program. And I believe also that there's a way to list them in just a list itself if the county wanted to put together some sort of land acquisition program. And so identifying future sites that would be good candidates for future purchase by the county for protection.
Mm. And I'm sorry, can you, I have a lot of tabs open, but can you point me to where the list, which ones are included in the comprehensive plan inventory?
Yeah, so right now we've got Bradwood Cliffs and Bradley State Park, which are included in the inventory right now as ecologically and scientifically significant natural areas. And then under state administrative rules, we're going to be required to include Blind Slough Swamp Preserve and the Napa Slough Island, because that's in the designated heritage program.
And so the scenic part of it, where it says scenic and natural areas policies, it's just talking about natural areas policies, or what? I guess because didn't you guys talk about the scenic ones last time?
Right. So I didn't include the ones that we discussed last meeting because we'd already covered those. So right now we're only talking, the policies for scenic sites and natural areas are grouped together in the Northeast Plan. So they're all labeled this way, but I only pulled the one that was relevant for natural areas.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay, this sounds good. And so is there another inventory of scenic? Maybe that was in last month's packet. But like, is the gorge or anything else listed as as part of the scenic inventory?
Yeah, so the what was it? It was Napa Gorge and
Big Creek Falls?
yeah, and there were a couple of others that we talked about, and they're in our meeting minutes. But yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 that were specifically listed as scenic sites, and then the group didn't identify any additional sites for future classification.
Okay. Okay, does anybody at this point have anything they'd want to add to this list?
Gail, without getting too deep into the woods, what's the difference between being included in the scenic listing, which is where the Nat Creek Falls and the gorge are now, or instead including them in this natural listing?
So you could do both. Like we talked about, there can be overlap and resources can be cross-inventoried. So with the natural areas, there's 2 types of lists we can include in our plan. One is if we've got a site that's on the heritage program already, that has to be included. So we know that we've got 2 sites we need to add. And then we can also go through the process, the full ESEE process, and identify it, review it against the environmental, social, economic, and energy impacts and consequences and conflicting uses, and look at that. Or we can also put together a list that doesn't go through that full ESEE process, that basically identifies sites that the county would consider for future acquisition for preservation. And I did summarize that correctly, didn't I? I think if I remember the memo correctly.
Yep, that sounds correct. And then, so if they're placed on a list for future acquisition, and prior to acquiring them, the county would, if they chose to apply ordinances to protect them in the meantime, then we would still have to go through the ESEE procedure. But if we left the current rules and didn't apply any ordinances to protect those resources until they were acquired, then that ESEE process would not be required.
And any property, if we were to choose to list properties, keep in mind that these are voluntary designations, and private property owners can request that they not be included in the list.
Okay, so any comments on these last 2 policies, the sedimentary uplands policy or community development?
Gail, could somebody briefly explain what under sedimentary uplands policy 1, what that means? I don't understand why the preferred use of sedimentary uplands is timber, open space, and wildlife. I don't really know what that means. Sorry.
Okay, so in all of the community plans, they've basically broken out and identified different types of preferred development based on the geography and the soils in a particular planning area. What the thinking was when this was done 40 years ago, I don't know why this was what they came up with. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough about sedimentary soils to tell you, if timber production is more productive there. It's probably, I would guess, where you find a lot of timbered areas already. So that's all I know. And
I
I
don't
know
know.
Jed's on the line, and he may know something about sedimentary soils and timber production. So
I kind of wonder, actually volcanic soils are very rich. They're, they have a lot of potassium in them typically. And forests grow very well on volcanic soils, soils derived from volcanic rocks. And oftentimes people just think of volcanic rocks as being like lavas or that sort of thing. But some of the ash deposits and cinder deposits are very rich. And plants love to grow on that stuff. So I don't know. I think it should be more based on the topography rather than the type of rocks that underlie it. And soil development depends on a lot of things, mostly on how long it's been sitting there and can develop from the rocks that are initially exposed and then weathered, and plant life has effects and they chemically alter and all those kind of things. So I don't know. I think I just refer to them as uplands, like they're not the flat plains along the coast or along the estuary. Anyway, it's just a thought.
okay, so this is what the community plan actually says. So sedimentary uplands consist of areas above the alluvial terraces underlain chiefly by sedimentary rocks. Most sedimentary rocks are found below 1,200 feet, although in a few areas, Eocene-age sedimentary rocks are exposed at elevations of 2,000 feet. Slopes may vary from 10 to 60%. In the Northeast study area of Clatsop County, there are significant areas of sedimentary uplands. Sedimentary uplands are characteristically lower and or more gradual slope than the basaltic highland and are generally found at elevations above 250 feet. Landslides are the major geologic hazard of the uplands. Landslide topography is present and occurrence of inactive landslides are typical. The sedimentary rock of the upland area is much more susceptible to landslides than are the basalt outcrops of the higher peaks.
So Gail, this is Jed.
Yeah.
I think that may actually be part of what's driving this policy in the comprehensive plan. Some of those sedimentary areas that are in the Northeast, people tried to use them for agriculture and that sort of thing, and the results were pretty detrimental to the landscape, and they've been converted back to forestry operations for the most part. And I think that may be the driver of this, is that they don't want people using them as grazing land and that sort of thing, because they were degrading and eroding pretty quickly, if I'm correct.
Okay, thanks, Jed.
That makes sense to me. I was wondering also if this was just a simple way of saying that the sedimentary uplands are not good for development. So instead of saying no development, they're saying what they do want done with it. So that makes a bit more sense to me now. Thank you.
Great. And the last policy on this page, community development, just says that landowners are encouraged to dedicate isolated natural features such as big trees, waterfalls, etc. And encouraged, as we know, is like not very strong language, but also you can't make landowners do very much, so it seems fine. So I would agree with the staff recommendation there. So I think we can move on to table 3, new issues and policies. Staff, do you want to say anything about any of these before we jump in, or?
Yeah, so staff put together 4 different comments identifying some of the issues or changes that we feel should be addressed in the comprehensive plan, or that we know we have to make in the comprehensive plan. So the first one really is more specific right now to the Clatsop Plains area. So, and who is this?
This is my son, Jetty. He just turned 2 this month.
Aw, hello, happy birthday.
Thanks for letting him join the meeting.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so anyway, going back to the policy here. So right now in the Clatsop Plains area, when people do subdivisions, they're supposed to cluster their houses together, and part of it is to keep that 30% required open space. But that's the only place where we really require it to be done. And there could potentially be subdivisions in the northeast area of the county, but they would not be required to be clustered. So staff has recommended that we include that language countywide and make it apply countywide to cluster subdivision and housing units. The second recommendation, let's see here, has to do with that acquisition program and that acquisition list that I talked about. It's also, as staff has pointed out, something that you could use as hazard mitigation. So if we have lands where we know there's continual flooding, repeat flooding, or landslide prone areas, that those may be areas where we want to start identifying properties for future acquisition. And I know with regard to floodplain and flooding, repeat flooding, I know FEMA encourages that as well, and they actually do have a buyout program where they will buy out repetitive lost properties. So that's the second one. The third one has to do with the Oregon Islands wilderness areas, which are the rocks that run up and down the coastline. So let's see. I have to apologize, I didn't reread these before we went to ground.
Gail, you're saying that like if a house or houses are in an area that is prone to having like a landslide, the county wants to acquire them so that they don't get rebuilt over and over again?
Yeah, so we don't have a program like that now, but it's not uncommon to see it in areas, especially where there's flooding. But, you know, taking again that example of the house in Astoria yesterday, I mean, that is a known area where there are actually a lot of known landslides that have occurred, probably within the last 100 years. And we know it's an area that's highly susceptible. So if the city, for example, wanted to do something like this, they could start a program that says, okay, we know that these are the really weak spots where the landslides are most likely to occur. And so we're going to start a program where we're just going to buy people out and just not have any more development there.
And at the moment, do you know if homeowners insurance still covers things like those landslides, or are they not? Are they rebuilding with their own money?
I don't know about landslides, Tally. I do know that with flood insurance, you can do that. However, if you are one of these repetitive loss properties, eventually you're not going to be able to do that because it's going to be really expensive to get your floodplain coverage.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I remember when we were looking for our house, there were certain properties that you had to buy flood insurance, which was obviously really expensive, and it made it, you not want those properties. But I didn't know if like mudslide, where mudslides fit onto the scale of like I know they still cover fire, but that might change. And now, there's earthquakes, and I don't know, there's a lot of different hazards.
I don't know about landslides. That's a good question. Okay. And so the third policy or comment that staff had was making sure that we get the federally designated wilderness area into the comprehensive plan, make sure that that's there. And then the fourth one, let's see here, is to include the 2 designated natural heritage sites, Blind Slough and Napa Slough. So.
Gail, what constitutes a subdivision?
That would be anything above 3 parcels, 3 to 30 parcels that's created. So when you do a partition, you're limited to a maximum of 3 parcels per year. So if you have one chunk of property for a partition, you can make up to 3 parcels in 1 year, and then you could come back next year if you needed to and do it again. Or you can do a subdivision, which is basically up to 30 lots per year that you can do all at one time and subdivide that. Subdivisions are usually where you're going to find the paved roads. You'll have more utilities available, things like maybe a water district or possibly a sewer district. Out by Lewis and Clark School, there is a new subdivision that went in called Bella Ridge, and they're 36 lots, and they've got water and sewer and paved roads, and it's a little bit more urban than it is a partition. So.
Well, and it reminds me a little bit of when we were talking about wildlife corridors as well. We talked about clustering and things like that. So it's a little, not the exact same, but similar ideas that we were talking about with that issue.
Yep, that's exactly the same issue and the same reasoning. Yep.
I was thinking back when we were talking about affordable housing and the possibility of doing it in rural areas. And early on, there was a guy who came in and talked at one of our meetings that he had land he wanted to subdivide, but was having trouble because of the zoning. So if you're going to do 3 parcels or more, then you might fall into these requirements for being clustered.
If we were to put a policy like that in, right now it's not required anywhere in the county except in the Clatsop Plains planning area.
Cool. I think I would be in support of including that for a county-wide policy. I just had another thought with the list of possible land acquisitions. Just that there's been a lot in the news lately about the effects of timber harvest on water sources and how like Arch Cape is trying to buy some more of the forest land around their water. And I don't have specific spots in mind, but I would think that would be valuable land for the county to own, is any drinking water forest adjacent to water sources.
Right, so I think if I heard you correctly, so Jennifer, consider, where am I? Lost my spit. So you want to consider an acquisition program perhaps for lands around drinking water supplies to help protect them, right?
Exactly. But otherwise, I'm in favor of all of the other staff recommendations on this new issues and policies worksheet. Does anybody have any concerns about them or have anything else they want to add?
I'm also supportive of the 4 staff recommendations and of the one that you suggested, Jennifer.
Okay. I think that's the last thing on our agenda then. So do we have one more meeting on goal 5, Gail?
Yeah, so what we'll do next month is we'll finish temporarily with goal 5, which the last resource we're going to look at are energy resources. And we're also going to start goal 13, which is energy conservation. So I want to tie those two together.
Mhm.
We still have some wetlands issues to work through, but we're waiting for CREST to complete their work before we come back to that. So next month we'll be transitioning out of goal 5, which is exciting. I know everybody here is excited to not be in goal 5 anymore. And we'll do the energies, so goal 13, and then we'll go back to goal 6 and start working forward again.
Great. All right. Well, it was good to see you all. I think that's it for the meeting today.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yep.